31 Law Call.
Good evening and welcome to WAAY 31 Law Call. I'm Sharon Doviet. Tonight we're taking your calls and questions about workers' compensation. If you got hurt on the job, how would you pay your bills? How do you go about filing a claim? Do you need a lawyer for this? Do you have to take a drug screen? And what if you might fail a drug screen? Can that kick out your case? The 31 Law Call number, 256-536-0077. You can call, but you can also text to that same number. So text us your questions tonight as well. You can also email a legal question. You can send any legal question any day of the week. You send it to lawcall@waaytv.com. And when we get to a show that's on point, we pull some out. We will have some of your questions tonight talking about workers' compensation. We've got with us William Meservey from Timberlake, League & Brooks. You guys do workers' comp. You do all kinds of personal injury kind of cases.
We do. We see the ins and outs of workers' comp on a daily basis, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Nobody's getting rich off workers' comp, right?
No one I've met.
We'll talk you through it. Call in your questions, and while we get those calls locked in, let's take a look at tonight's You Make the Law Call video. We pull some video off of YouTube. So here's somebody having a good time out on the water. What happens with something like this? Okay, if it's family members, you know, accidents happen, but are you seeing some things that make you question the safety of this and whether there might be something to talk about legally?
Yeah, you know, so
and he was okay, but it doesn't look good.
The old defense of assumption of the risk comes to mind.
Okay.
But, you know, interestingly enough, they make these floats now that get pulled behind boats, and in this case, a wave runner or jet ski, that are designed to take off. They're designed to catch air and lift folks 10, 15 feet in the air. As you can imagine, all sorts of injuries have come from those, and there have been some products claims. But if you were just to bring a simple negligence claim, I think you'd have a hard time overcoming assumption of the risk. I mean,
because you got on it.
You're hopping on a tube that you know is tied to the back of a wave runner, and your buddy's hopping on to give you a good time, and you know things are going to happen.
If it turns out to be something where the guy who's on the wave runner has been drinking, or you're pulled behind a boat and some alcohol or something like that is involved, does that change things?
If you know about it, it is going to...
You assume the risk.
Assume the risk, right?
Okay.
Now, if you're like, hey, Rich, did you drink any beers today? And he says, no, buddy, hop on. And then you go, and it happens, and it turns out, hey, he's had about 12, and you just didn't see it, then you may have a claim. But, you know, if it's a situation where you know that, you know, the driver's been drinking, you've all been on the same boat dock,
you've all been doing the same thing.
Visiting the same cooler.
Okay.
You're going to have a tough time.
Okay. Tonight we're taking your calls and questions about workers' compensation. So what is workers' compensation insurance? Why do we even have this thing?
Sure. So, you know, the history of it, if you want to call it that, goes back sort of to the Industrial Revolution. You had all these people coming in off of farms to work in factories. There was no OSHA. People were getting hurt, killed, maimed left and right. And the old common law theory of negligence that would be pursued on behalf of the injured worker was failure to provide a safe work environment. So they'd have to prove that the company had failed to provide a safe work environment for their employees. And that was the direct, you know, cause of the injured worker's injury. Well, you had the vast majority of people could not prove it was the company's fault. You had workers getting, like we said, hurt, maimed, and killed. Their families would starve. And so what happened is labor and management came together and developed what's known as the workers' compensation system. And Alabama's is based off Minnesota's. But the short of it is that if you're injured on the job and you're an employee and you are not violating a safety rule or horseplay or something like that, you're automatically entitled to certain benefits, right? And so that's going to be medical treatment for life as it relates to your particular injury, temporary total disability, which is 2/3 your average weekly wage, that's tax-free. And then lastly, you're entitled to some sum of money for permanent partial impairment or permanent total disability. That tends to be where the majority of the legal disputes come in. What is the claimant owed at the end of it all? You know, but what it also did, the other part of that compromise, is there is no pain and suffering and there is no mental anguish in a workers' compensation claim. So, you know, if it's an injury, let's say I cut my arm open on the job, I gotta go to the hospital, you know, a couple stitches, but more or less okay. That heals up, no long-term problems. Workers' comp's really just going to owe me medical treatment and 2/3 my average weekly wage for the time I'm out of work.
Okay.
If it's a situation where you have a permanent injury, so, you know, lifting heavy boxes, tear my rotator cuff, I have a surgery, I don't have the same range of motion that I did before, I don't have the same strength in that shoulder that I did before, then you're going to have some form of permanent partial impairment. Now, what is crazy is that Alabama still uses $220 as a multiplier in those cases. So in 1978, which is the last time Alabama's Workers' Compensation Act was updated,
1978, it's been a while.
$220 was the average household median income for the state of Alabama. Was it such a raw deal? But unlike being injured in any other way where we follow common law, this is all codified statutory law down in Montgomery. And as you can imagine, our legislature has not updated that formula and several other aspects of the Workers' Compensation Act that need to be addressed.
Nobody's getting rich off workers' comp. Okay, we got in a text message. Are all businesses or organizations or firms required to have workers' comp insurance?
In theory, yes, although Alabama does allow you to be self-insured. So if you can prove to the Department of Insurance or the Department of Labor that you meet these certain qualifications and you have X amount of dollars in reserve held to handle workers' compensation claims, you can self-insure. And there's self-insured funds that several Alabama workplaces take part in, sort of pool together.
Okay.
But workers' comp, by and large, is an insurance claim, similar to, you know, if you were rear-ended by somebody insured with, just say, State Farm. You're generally going to be dealing with the State Farm for the majority of the claim, not the actual person who hit you.
Right.
And it's the same thing here. The employer is going to have workers' comp coverage that's typically through a third-party insurance company.
Okay.
And so your employer generally is not super involved in the ins and outs of your claim. Now, if you work for a company that handles, you know, let's say you work for a company that has a lot of injuries, like a big manufacturing plant, something like that, they're going to have an on-site nurse. They're going to be a lot more involved in that type of a workers' compensation claim than if you're just, you know, working for your local grocery store and get injured.
How about small companies? Is there a certain number of employees you have to have before you actually have to have workers' comp?
You have to have 5 employees.
Okay.
For the law to require you to have workers' compensation insurance. Several businesses with fewer than 5 still have it.
Okay.
I represented one time a painter, and the painter was the sole employee of the company. And in workers' comp, you sue the employer.
Okay.
So it was really him suing himself.
Okay.
Or rather his LLC,
okay.
right, for workers' compensation benefits through the insurance.
Okay.
But, you know, that particular claim had to be filed. And so it was really an odd situation because he was sort of on both sides of the
I guess
so to speak.
in a business like that, you're likely to get hurt at some point, so maybe it's a good idea. Okay, you had said there may be a change in the law coming up related to teachers. Is there something happening with teachers?
If you're an employee of the state of Alabama, you are not entitled to workers' compensation. Now, several counties will provide workers' compensation for their sheriff's deputies, although they're technically state employees. State employees are left with something called Board of Adjustment. Board of Adjustment is even further down south than workers' compensation laws as far as protecting people.
Okay.
And where that really hits home is with school teachers. The school teachers are technically state employees. They're not entitled to workers' compensation if they're injured on the job. And they're left trying to cover their bases for medical treatment and then submitting receipts down to Montgomery, which they may get reimbursed for, they may not.
Yeah.
And it's really an uncertain situation for folks who are already earning not enough money.
Okay. We got in a text message. Let's see if we can figure it out. Hi, I had a work injury to both my hands and my back. I filed one claim with my employer, but when I asked, time went on my second hand, got injured. I reported it. My employer did not file the claim like they did with the first one. Okay, so if you get multiple injuries, are you going to have multiple cases? Does it figure into one case?
Yeah, so it can, and sometimes it doesn't, though.
Okay.
So think about if you're in a car and you collide with somebody, you go another 200, 300 yards down the road and collide with someone else.
Yeah.
Is that one accident or is it two?
How did it get started? Did the same thing cause both accidents?
Well, that's right. So there's context that's got to be viewed with that, right? You know, is it a situation where he had some injury to his left hand and then, you know, that got worse over time, or he re-injured it? All of those things sort of matter. But by and large, if you injure multiple body parts from the same incident, that's all going to be one workers' compensation claim.
Okay. What is court like if you have a workers' comp case? Do you go to court? Do you have a trial?
That's a great question. You are absolutely entitled to a trial in a workers' compensation setting. However, you are not entitled to a jury trial. You get what's called a bench trial, and that just means that the judge is going to serve both as the arbiter of law and of fact. So generally, the judge is always the arbiter of law. The jury's the arbiter of fact, right? And so in this situation, the judge plays both roles. You go in front of the judge. They're relatively easy. Easy is not the right word. They're relatively short trials.
Okay.
Okay. And part of that is because there is no jury. There's no voir dire or selection of the jury. There's none of those, let's dismiss the jury and have this conversation between the lawyers and the judge.
Right.
None of that happens. And so it's almost an expedited trial. It doesn't last very long. And by and large, the parties can agree on most of the key facts prior to that trial taking place.
Most workers' comp cases, do you have any kind of a court hearing, or does it just get streamlined and everybody agrees on something and you go forward?
So again, because workers' compensation is codified law, statutory out of Montgomery, that law says that the state of Alabama does have to approve all settlements of workers' compensation benefits. And so before COVID, you always had a hearing with the judge.
Okay.
Where you had to present the facts, and he'd either say, yes, the state of Alabama approves this, or no, it doesn't. You need to do X, Y, and Z, and come back and see me. During COVID, the state allowed ombudsmen, which are state employees that work for the Department of Labor, to kind of serve in that role and close out some of these cases. And they're already involved in workers' compensation cases. They mediate cases for free. They provide some benefits to workers' compensation claimants. And so, you know, the state kind of opened it up and said, look, we can do these telephonically with these ombudsmen. And that's really streamlined the process. I don't think any of the judges really want those cases back. They've got enough on their dockets without those workers' compensation walkthroughs.
Yeah.
And so, by and large, you can do the benefit review conference. There are still times you have to go in front of a judge, but not always.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Call in your questions, the 31 Law Call number, 256-536-0077. You can also text, and we've got some email questions. We've got Kevin's email question talking about, hey, if you got fired, if you get fired once you file a claim, then what do you do? We'll be right back.
You're watching WAAY 31 Law Call. Your rights, your calls, live. Presented by the Tennessee Valley's award-winning personal injury and wrongful death law firm, Timberlake, League & Brooks. Featuring the knowledge and experience of Attorney Michael Timberlake, Attorney Will League, Attorney Heath Brooks, Attorney William Meservey. And hosted by broadcaster and family law attorney Sharon Doviet. This is WAAY 31 Law Call.
Welcome back. Tonight we're talking all about workers' compensation. William Meservey is here from Timberlake, League & Brooks, and we got an unusual kind of workers' comp question.
All right.
So we got this text question in. I just got put out of prison after serving 19 years. Can I receive some type of check to help me get on my feet? I got injured a few times during my incarceration as well. Okay. Does workers' comp apply to somebody in prison?
It does not apply to somebody in prison. Okay. However, I did successfully represent an individual one time who was on community release. And so he was free to go find employment during the day, and then he had to report back to the jail in the evening. So different than work release, where you're on a chain gang, as they call them sometimes.
Yeah.
But there was a particular employer that was hiring up a lot of these people. And it was tough manual labor, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And the fellow got injured, and they said, no, we don't owe you anything because you're, you know, a prisoner. And the Department of Labor sided with us that no, in a community release situation where someone's free to go find their own employment,
Yeah.
and they did, they have to provide workers' comp coverage. So in certain situations, if you're on community release or something like that, where you're able to go and create your own employment opportunity, then you are entitled to workers' compensation benefits.
Interesting.
But if you're just simply in prison, or if you're on work release or working on the chain gang or whatever it is they call it these days, then you're not going to be entitled to workers' compensation benefits.
Very interesting. But if you hadn't come to see somebody, if they tell you no and you take no for an answer, that's the answer you're going to get, right?
That is correct.
Go see a lawyer. We've got Cole on the line with a question from Huntsville. Hi, Cole. Thanks for calling. What's your question tonight?
Hey, I was running an errand for my boss, and I got hit by a guy running a red light in a pickup.
Okay.
Now I'm hurt, and my car's trashed. Does that count as workers' comp because I was on the clock when it happened?
Good question.
So you'll actually have two cases, or potentially have two cases there. One is you're going to have your workers' compensation case, and you're going to have the benefits we discussed earlier in the show, your medical treatment, temporary total disability, and some permanent partial impairment at the end if you were injured in the wreck. You also have a third-party case, and the third-party case is, just as you'd imagine, it'd be against the other driver who is at fault in that collision. Those two cases play off each other. You can't fully double dip.
Okay.
So what happens is workers' comp is going to pay for all the medical treatment. They have a statutory right of reimbursement out of that third-party case. And the third-party case is always worth more because you can get mental anguish and pain and suffering.
Gotcha.
Where you can't get it over in workers' comp.
Okay.
But there is sort of a delicate dance there between those two. In almost all instances involving a workers' comp case and a third-party case deriving from the same incident, you're going to need a lawyer to help you navigate that.
Okay. Good luck with it, Cole. We got this email from Kevin. Kevin had said, I reported a work injury last week, and I received a separation notice in the mail today. Is that legal? Does my termination cancel my claim?
Okay, so a couple things there. First of all, the termination does not cancel the claim. If you're fired from your job for whatever the reason, and you've got a pending workers' compensation claim, they still owe you all the benefits, with the exception they may not owe you temporary total disability. That being said, in that particular scenario, Alabama law does, you are an at-will employment state. You can be fired for good reason, bad reason, no reason.
Okay.
Alabama adds one protection. You cannot be fired for having filed or maintained a workers' compensation action. Now, what you see is most employers are savvy enough that they're not going to say, hey, you filed a workers' compensation claim.
That's
I'm gonna
why
let you
we fired you.
right? They're going to say, well, you were a minute late from lunch, and we're going to let you go.
Okay.
So you do technically have a separate claim there for a retaliatory discharge, we call it. However, you have to show that you were actually fired for the workers' compensation claim and not for any other reason. So if it is a situation where you arrived 15 minutes late from lunch, or you did X, Y, or Z, or you violated a safety rule and they terminate you, albeit that you have a pending workers' compensation claim, they can terminate you in that situation. However, they can't create some pretextual reason to terminate you, and that's what the law says is, look, if they terminate you and they say it's for valid cause, then you've got to turn around and show that that cause was pretextual in nature and that they actually fired you for workers' compensation.
Can you do that? Can you prove it?
I've had employers terminate folks on a workers' compensation leave of absence in writing.
And say that's why they did it?
Yeah.
Okay. Go
So
see a lawyer.
it does happen.
Okay. We've got Michael on the line with a question from Higdon, Alabama. Hi, Michael. Thanks for calling. What's your question tonight?
Yeah, my boss pays me $3 an hour, and what can I do about that?
So that's not going to be a workers' compensation issue, but that would be a wage and labor issue.
Okay.
That would be something to certainly contact an employment lawyer about. You know, they have to comply with minimum wage requirements at the very least. And so you would have a potential there for, you know, unfair wages or some action under employment law.
Now, I think waiters and waitresses can, servers can be paid because they're getting tips and things like that, but most jobs, minimum wage.
I think it still has to average out to minimum wage.
Okay. Good luck with it, Michael. Okay, we got this email question from Liz. Liz says, my husband's hearing is just about gone after working 20 years around noisy machines. He says it's just old age, but I think it's because of his job. Would something like that be covered under workers' comp?
It could potentially be covered under workers' comp, but you would have to have a doctor linking the hearing loss to some sort of loud machine that you could show you ran for 20 years or something like that. So most what we call idiopathic injuries, or sometimes you think of that as just an injury that happens, like a heart attack, a stroke, those type of things, traditionally are never going to be covered under workers' comp. Chronic injuries for the longest time never were either. With carpal tunnel and typists, kind of the first to break through that barrier. And so you can now receive compensation or workers' compensation benefits for chronic, over time, repetitive use type injuries. But they're not easy to prove. You're still going to have a doctor that says, look, by virtue of running this machine that exposed this particular person to this decimal level of X for Y amount of years, equals his hearing loss.
The fact that you went out hunting a lot and shot guns without wearing ear protection, that's what the defense is going to say. Yeah, we'll find something. Okay.
And so they're tricky.
Okay. Is there anything that you might be doing that would get your case kicked out? Like, so if can they make you take a drug screen and come back and say, oh, you tested positive for marijuana, we're not going to cover you?
Yeah, the law actually says they're supposed to give you a drug screen after an injury in workers' compensation situations. So let's just, play that out. If you violate a safety rule, if you're horseplaying, if you're intoxicated, there's a laundry list of things you can do, get injured on the job, and not be covered. But even if you just pick one off that list, let's say intoxication, the ominous is still on the employer to show that the intoxication caused your injury and not something else. So an example of that may be you're working in a factory, or let's just say a warehouse, and you've had a fun lunch earlier that day, and you had some beers or whatever, and a box falls off the shelf and injures your neck. Well, that was going to happen whether you had a couple beers at lunch or not, right? And so in that situation, they're going to have to continue to pay you workers' compensation benefits. Now, let's say you drive a forklift, and you go, you're at that same fun lunch, right? And you're the ones that you knocked the shelves with your forklift, and you fell off and hurt your knee or whatever. They're going to pretty well be able to show, hey, look, the intoxication is the reason why you ran your forklift into the shelving, and we're not going to provide you with workers' compensation benefits. But then other certain, violations of safety rules can also impact those types of cases.
We're going to take a break. Be right back answering more of your questions about workers' comp. Stay with us. If you didn't get your questions answered tonight, here's how to get in touch with William Meservey with Timberlake, League & Brooks. They are personal injury attorneys, so that's everything from workers' comp to accidents to medical malpractice. 256-536-0770 or 800-804-2502. The website is law-injury.com, and if you like them on Facebook, you can learn more about the law that way.
And Sharon Doviet is our family law attorney expert, handling all matters divorce, child custody, adoption. 256-539-7337, SharonFamilyLaw.com.
Adoptions are the fun cases we have in family law. Thanks for your questions, and we'll see you next week.
Good night.